Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is John Steel Creek, and I've been doing search and rescue in West Virginia for 16 years. I've pulled people out of caves, off cliffs, and from the middle of nowhere, more times than I can count. I thought I'd seen everything the mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. It was November when the call came in. A hunter named Mike Brennan had gotten lost in Screaming Jenny Hollow and barely made it out alive. When Sheriff O'Brien brought him to the station, Mike was shaking so hard he could barely hold his coffee cup. "I heard my brother calling for help," Mike kept saying. "Clear as day, John. Tommy was calling my name from deep in that hollow." The thing is, Tommy had died in a car crash 6 months earlier. I sat across from Mike in the station's break room, watching him try to light a cigarette with trembling hands. He was a good hunter, knew these woods better than most. Not the type to get spooked by wind in the trees. "Tell me what happened," I said, pulling out my notebook. "I was tracking a buck near the rim of the hollow when I heard it. Tommy's voice, plain as I'm talking to you now. He was crying, saying he was hurt and needed help." Mike took a shaky drag from his cigarette. "I know it sounds crazy, but I started following the voice deeper into the hollow." "How far did you go?" "Maybe a mile down the old logging trail." The voice kept getting clearer, more desperate. Tommy was begging me to hurry, saying he was trapped somewhere dark. Mike's eyes went wide. "That's when I realized I was standing at the edge of Dead Man's Drop. Another step and I'd have fallen 200 feet. I'd been to Dead Man's Drop before. Sheer rock face, no way to survive that fall. The strange thing was, Mike said he heard the voice coming from below the cliff, like someone was calling up from the bottom." "You got any recording equipment with you?" I asked. Mike nodded and it pulled out a small digital recorder. "Always bring it hunting. Helps me remember good spots." His hand shook as he rewound it. I caught some of it before I ran. The playback was mostly wind and rustling leaves. Then, clear as anything, a man's voice echoed through the speaker. "Mike, Mike, please help me. I'm trapped down here." The voice was coming from somewhere it shouldn't be possible. The hollow was empty that day. No other hunters, no hikers. And the voice sounded exactly like it was coming from the bottom of a 200-foot cliff. "That's Tommy," Mike whispered. "That's my brother's voice." I'd heard plenty of stories about Screaming Jenny Hollow over the years. Local folks claimed it was haunted by a Civil War woman who went crazy looking for her lost family. They said if you listened too close to the voices in that hollow, you'd end up like her, lost forever, calling for people who'd never answer. I never believed those stories. But sitting there, listening to a dead man's voice calling from an impossible place, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "I need to go check this out," I told Sheriff O'Brien after Mike left. "Could be someone else down there, using some kind of equipment to throw their voice." O'Brien shook his head. "John, that hollow's got a bad history. 6 people have gone missing in there over the past 15 years, all during November. All of them heard voices calling their names. All the more reason to investigate. Take Beth with you," he said. "Don't go alone." Beth Caldwell was my usual partner, a solid ranger with 8 years' experience. She was waiting by my truck when I got outside, already loading gear into the back. "Heard about the hunter," she said. "We really doing this?" "You don't have to come." "Like hell," she tossed me a radio. "But we're staying in constant contact and we're out of there before dark." As Wabim, it drove towards Screaming Jenny Hollow. I couldn't stop thinking about that recording. The voice was too clear, too real. And something about the way it said Mike's name, desperate, familiar, made my skin crawl. The hollow was 25 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a dirt logging road that hadn't been maintained in years. As we bounced along the rutted track, Beth checked our equipment one more time. GPS, emergency beacons, cold weather gear, first aid kit, she rattled off. What are we expecting to find down there? Probably nothing, I said. But I was thinking about my own son, David, safe at college 200 miles away. We hadn't talked in months, not since our last fight about my divorce from his mother. If I heard his voice calling from that hollow, would I be smart enough to know it wasn't real? The truck reached the end of the road at noon. Screaming Jenny Hollow stretched out below us, a deep valley system carved between steep ridges, thick with rhododendron and bare November trees. At the bottom, a creek wound between moss-covered rocks, its water running black under the gray sky. It looked peaceful, normal. But as soon as we stepped out of the truck, I noticed something wrong. No bird sounds, no insects buzzing. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, like the air itself was swallowing sound. "You feel that?" Beth asked quietly. I nodded. The silence was so complete it made my ears ring. In 16 years of mountain rescue, I'd never been in a place that felt so empty. We started down the old logging trail, following the route Mike had described. The path was overgrown but still visible, winding through stands of mountain laurel and over fallen logs. Our radios crackled with static, but we could still reach base camp. After half a mile, we found something that made us both stop. Carved into a large oak tree, about 7 feet up, were dozens of names and dates. Some looked fresh, others were weathered and old. I recognized a few, people who'd gone missing in the hollow over the years. "Look at this," Beth said, pointing to one carving near the bottom. Jenny McClure, 1863. That was the woman from the local stories, the one who supposedly haunted this place. But why would her name be carved here with all the others? "John," Beth's voice was tight, "look at the newest one." At eye level, cut deep into the bark, were fresh letters. Tommy Brennan, October 2023. The same month Mike's brother had died in that car accident. We stood there staring at the tree, and I felt the first real chill of fear run down my spine. Someone, or something, was keeping track of people connected to this place, and they'd added Tommy's name before Mike ever set foot in the hollow. A sound drifted up from deeper in the valley, faint but unmistakable. A woman's voice, crying. The crying sound came and went like wind through the trees, but it was definitely human. A woman sobbing somewhere down in the thick part of the hollow. "Could be our missing person," Beth said, but her voice was uncertain. We followed the sound deeper into the valley. The logging trail got harder to follow as we went down, sometimes disappearing completely under fallen leaves and dead branches. The rhododendron bushes grew thicker too, creating natural walls on both sides of us. The crying got louder as we walked. It was heartbreaking. The sound of someone who'd lost everything and couldn't stop grieving. Every few minutes it would stop, and we'd pause to listen. Then it would start up again from a slightly different direction. "Hello?" I called out. "This is search and rescue. Can you hear me?" The crying stopped immediately. The silence that followed felt heavy and wrong, like the whole forest was holding its breath. "We're here to help," Beth shouted. "If you can hear us, make some noise." For a long moment, nothing. Then, so faint I almost missed it, a woman's voice drifted through the trees. "Help me find them. Please help me, Fum. In my boys." The voice was coming from our left, somewhere past a thick stand of mountain laurel. We pushed through the bushes, thorns catching on our jackets, following what might have been an old deer path. "Keep talking," I called. "We're coming to you." But the voice had gone quiet again. We emerged from the laurel thicket into a small clearing I'd never seen before, even though I thought I knew this hollow pretty well. In the center stood the ruins of an old log cabin, just a foundation and one crumbling stone chimney. Frost covered everything, even though the temperature was barely below freezing. "John," Beth whispered, "look at the ground." Around the cabin ruins, the earth was torn up like someone had been digging frantically with their bare hands. There were dozens of holes, some shallow, others knee-deep. Scattered around them were pieces of rotted cloth and what looked like old metal buttons. Civil War era, if I had to guess. "She's looking for bodies," Beth said quietly. "Graves." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the November air. This was where Jenny McClure had lived, back in 1863, where she'd waited for her husband and sons to come home from the war, where she'd finally lost her mind when she realized they never would. The crying started again, closer now. It was coming from the other side of the clearing near a steep drop-off that led down to the creek. We crossed the clearing carefully, stepping around the dig holes. As we got closer to the drop-off, I could see down into the hollow's deepest part, a natural bowl of rock and dead trees where the morning mist still clung to the ground. "There," Beth pointed. "I see someone." At the bottom of the bowl, maybe 50 feet down, a figure in a long dress knelt by the creek. Her back was to us, and she was digging in the mud with her hands, still crying. "Ma'am," I called down, "are you hurt? Do you need help?" The figure stopped digging but didn't turn around. The crying stopped too. "Ma'am, I'm John Steel Creek with West Virginia Search and Rescue. My partner and I are to help you." Slowly the figure stood up and turned toward us. Even from 50 feet away I could see her face clearly. It was a woman, but something was terribly wrong with her appearance. Her skin was gray-white like old paper, and her hair hung in wet tangles around her face. The dress she wore looked like it was from another century. Long sleeves, high collar, the kind of thing women wore during the Civil War. But the worst part was her eyes. Even at that distance I could see they were completely black. Not just the pupils. The whole eye, like looking into empty holes. "Oh, God," Beth breathed beside me. The woman opened her mouth and spoke, but the voice that came out wasn't hers. It was a man's voice, deep and familiar. "John, Dad, help me. I'm trapped down here." It was my son David's voice. Every instinct I had as a father kicked in. David was in trouble, he needed help, and I was the only one who could save him. I started looking for a way down the steep slope, my heart pounding. "John, stop!" Beth grabbed my arm. "That's not David. David's safe at college, remember? You talked to him last week." She was right. David was 200 miles away, probably in class or studying in his dorm room. But the voice calling for help sounded so much like him, so scared and desperate. "Dad, please," the voice cried again. "She won't let me go. She's keeping me down here in the dark." The woman with the black eyes was still staring up at us, but her mouth wasn't moving. The voice was coming from somewhere else, everywhere and nowhere at once. "It's a trick," Beth said firmly. "Some kind of acoustic illusion. The stories about this place, they all mention voices calling people's names." My rational mind knew she was right, but my father's heart was screaming at me to find a way down there, to save my boy. "I know what you're thinking," Beth continued, keeping her voice calm and steady. "But if you go down there after that voice, you'll end up like Mike almost did, lost or dead. That's what happened to all the others." The woman below let out a wail of grief that echoed off the rock walls. Then she spoke again, this time in her own voice, a voice full of pain and madness. "They promised they'd come home. My husband, my 3 boys. They promised they'd find me." "The Civil War," I said, understanding flooding through me. "She's been waiting here since 1863 looking for her family. And now she's using other people's voices to try to get help," Beth added. "But everyone who comes down to help her—" She didn't need to finish. We both knew what happened to people who disappeared in screaming Jenny Hollow. My radio crackled to life. Sheriff O'Brien's voice came through, distorted by static. "John, Beth, you guys okay out there? We've got another situation developing." I keyed the radio, still staring down at the woman by the creek. "We're fine, Mike. What's happening?" "Got a call from David Steel Creek's college. They can't find him anywhere. His roommate says he left last night saying he heard his dad calling for help." My blood went cold. "What do you mean they can't find him?" "His car's gone, John, and his cell phone's pinging somewhere near screaming Jenny Hollow." The woman below us let out another wail, this one sounding almost triumphant. She was no longer alone by the creek. Standing beside her was a young man in a college sweatshirt. My son David. But he was supposed to be 200 miles away. "David!" I screamed down into the hollow. The figure that looked like my son raised his head. Even from 50 feet away, I could see his face was pale and his eyes were wrong, not black like the woman's, but empty and unfocused, like he was sleepwalking. "Dad?" His voice drifted up, confused and scared. "Dad, where are you? I can't see anything. It's so dark down here." "Stay right there," I shouted. "I'm coming down." I started looking frantically for a way down the steep slope. There were some old tree roots and rock ledges that might work. But it would be dangerous. Beth grabbed my arm again. "John, think about this. Your son was at college last night. How did he get here so fast? How did he even know where you were?" She was right, but I didn't care. That was David down there, and he needed help. "The sheriff said his car was gone," I said. "He drove here." "In one night? That's a 12-hour drive, and you said you talked to him last week. When did he have time to disappear from college and drive here?" I looked down at the figure by the creek again. It still looked exactly like David. Same height, same messy brown hair, same nervous way of standing with his hands in his pockets. But something about the way he moved was off, like he was underwater or moving through thick air. My radio crackled again. "John, this is O'Brien. I've got more information on your son. His roommate says he's been acting strange for the past week, talking about hearing voices, saying his dad needed help. The college called in a welfare check yesterday, but David wasn't in his room." "How long has he been missing?" I asked. "At least 3 days, maybe more. His last class attendance was Monday. Today was Thursday. If David had been missing for 3 days, he could have driven here. But why? What made him think I needed help?" "Dad!" The voice from below was more urgent now. "She won't let me leave. She says I have to stay here until you come down." The woman in the old dress was standing right next to the David figure now. She reached out with one pale hand and touched his shoulder, and he went completely still. "She's controlling him somehow," Beth said quietly. "John, that might not even be your real son down there." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. Mike heard his dead brother's voice. You're hearing your son's voice. What if this thing, this Jenny McClure, what if she can make us see and hear what we most fear losing?" I wanted to believe her. It would make things so much easier if the figure down there wasn't really David. But it looked exactly like him, moved like him, sounded like him. My phone buzzed with a text message. With shaking hands, I pulled it out. The message was from David's number. "Dad, help me. I'm trapped in the hollow. She won't let me go unless you come down alone." "Show me," Beth said. I held out the phone. She read the message and went pale. "That's impossible. There's no cell service down here. Our radios barely work." She was right. My phone showed no bars, no signal at all. But somehow I'd received a text from David's phone. Another message appeared. "Please hurry. I'm so scared." Then another. "She's showing me terrible things. What happened to her family?" And another. "Dad, she says she'll let me go if you take my place. She just needs someone to help her find her boys." "It's a trap," Beth said firmly. "Whatever's down there, it's trying to lure you into trading places with David. But what if it really is him? What if somehow David got mixed up in this and now he's trapped?" Before Beth could answer, we heard new voices coming from the hollow. Multiple voices, all calling different names. "Sarah, help me." "Mom, where are you?" "Tommy, I'm hurt. Please don't leave me here." The voices echoed off the rock walls, creating a chorus of desperate cries for help, and with each voice, new figures appeared in the mist at the bottom of the hollow. Men, women, children, all standing motionless around the woman in the old dress. "She's collected them," I whispered. "Everyone who came looking for the voices they heard. They're all down there." "And now she wants you too," Beth said. "John, we have to get out of here. We have to call for backup, maybe get a helicopter to extract whoever's really down there." But as she spoke, the mist at the bottom of the hollow began to rise. It climbed up the rock walls like thick smoke, bringing with it a bone-deep cold that made our breath steam. "The fog's moving wrong," Beth said, backing away from the edge. "Fog doesn't climb uphill like that." She was right. The mist was flowing up toward us like water filling a bowl, but in reverse. And as it rose, the voices got louder, more desperate. "Don't leave us here. Come down and help. She promised she'd let us go if just one more person comes." The David figure at the bottom looked up at me with those empty, unfocused eyes. "Dad, please. I don't want to be here forever. I just want to go home." My heart broke. Real or not, that was my son's voice, my son's face. How could I abandon him? I started toward the steep slope again, but Beth stepped in front of me. "If you go down there, you'll never come back up," she said. "And then what happens to the real David? If he's really missing, if he's really in trouble somewhere, who's going to save him if you're trapped down there too?" The mist had risen halfway up the walls now, and it was getting harder to see the bottom of the hollow. But I could still hear David calling for me. "There has to be a way to help him," I said. "Maybe there is," Beth replied, "but not by walking into an obvious trap." My radio crackled one more time. O'Brien's voice was barely audible through the static. "John, found David's car, abandoned on Route 19, 20 miles from your location. No sign of—" The radio went dead. David's car was 20 miles away, which meant either he'd walked 20 miles through the mountains in November weather, or the figure down there wasn't really him at all. The mist reached the top of the slope, and suddenly we were surrounded by thick, cold fog. The temperature dropped at least 30 degrees in seconds, and I could barely see Beth, even though she was standing right next to me. "We need to get out of here," she said, grabbing my arm. "Now." But when I turned to follow her back toward the trail, I realized we had a problem. In the teat, thick mist, surrounded by the same gray fog in every direction. I couldn't tell which way we'd come from. We were lost in screaming Jenny Hollow, and the voices were getting closer. The fog was so thick we couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. Beth and I stood back to back, trying to figure out which way led back to the trail. "Stay calm," Beth said, but I could hear the fear in her voice. "We just need to head uphill. The trail follows the ridgeline." We started walking, or at least we tried to. But every direction felt like uphill, and every step seemed to take us deeper into the mist instead of out of it. Worse, the ground under our feet didn't feel right. Sometimes soft like mud, sometimes hard like stone. Sometimes it felt like we were walking on nothing at all. The voices were all around us now, coming from the mist itself. "John, over here. This way, Dad. Help us. Don't leave us." Some were David's voice, some were strangers, and some were voices I almost recognized but couldn't quite place. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing in ways that made no sense. "Don't listen to them," Beth said, staying close beside me. "Just focus on getting out." But it was hard to ignore the voices when one of them was so familiar. Every time I heard David calling for help, my father's instincts kicked in, and I wanted to run toward the sound. We walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The fog never thinned, the voices never stopped, and we never seemed to get anywhere. Finally, we stumbled into a clearing. It was the same clearing we'd found before, with the ruined cabin and the stone chimney. But now it looked different. The cabin wasn't ruined anymore. It was whole with a wooden roof and glass windows. Warm yellow light spilled out through the windows, and smoke rose from the chimney. "That's impossible," Beth whispered. The cabin was destroyed. The front door opened, and a woman stepped out. She wasn't the pale, gray figure we'd seen by the creek. This woman looked normal, alive. She had long brow and hair and wore a simple dress that might have been from the 1860s, but it was clean and well kept. She looked tired and sad, but not mad or dangerous. "Please come in," she said in a soft voice. "You must be cold." Part of me knew this was wrong, that the cabin shouldn't be here, that this woman was somehow connected to everything that had been happening. But another part of me was freezing and exhausted and just wanted somewhere safe to rest. "John, no," Beth said quietly. "This is part of the trap." But the woman heard her. "There's no trap," she said sadly. "I'm just lonely. I've been alone in this hollow for so long, waiting for my family to come home." She looked directly at me. "Your son is here, you know. He came looking for you 3 days ago. He's inside, sleeping by the fire." Despite everything Beth had said, despite all the warning signs, I felt myself taking a step toward the cabin. If David was really in there, if he was safe and warm, "Show me," I said. The woman smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her. Of course. A father should be, with his son. She led us toward the cabin door. As we got closer, I could hear sounds from inside. The crackle of a fire, the soft murmur of voices, the clink of dishes. It sounded peaceful, normal, like a family home. We stepped through the doorway, and I saw them. Sitting around a large wooden table were maybe 20 people of different ages, men, women, a few children. They all looked normal, alive, but their eyes were empty and unfocused like the David figures had been. They were eating a meal, but they moved slowly, mechanically, like sleepwalkers. And there, at the far end of the table, was David. He looked up when we entered, and his face broke into a smile. "Dad, I knew you'd find me." But his eyes were the same empty, unfocused look as all the others. "David," I breathed, starting toward him. "John, stop!" Beth grabbed my arm. "Look at them, really look." I forced myself to study the people around the table more carefully. Their clothes were from different time periods, some modern, some older, some that looked like they were from the Civil War era. And while they were eating, I realized the food on their plates never got smaller, and their mouths never actually chewed. "They're not really eating," I said. "They're not really alive," Beth replied. "Not anymore." The woman who'd let us in closed the door behind us. When I turned to look at her, she was changing. Her hair was becoming gray and stringy, her skin pale and translucent. Her eyes were turning black. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice was changing too, becoming hollow and echoing. "But I need help finding my boys. They went to war and never came home. Everyone who comes here promises to help, but then they try to leave." "So you trap them," I said. "I give them peace," she corrected. "No more pain, no more worry. They stay with me, and we're family together." David stood up from the table, moving in that same slow, underwater way. "It's nice here, Dad. She takes care of us. We don't have to worry about anything anymore." "That's not living, son. That's just existing." "But we're together," he said. "Isn't that what matters?" I looked at his empty eyes and felt my heart break. This thing, whatever it was, had taken my son and turned him into a shadow of himself. "Let him go," I said to the woman. "He's not one of your family. He doesn't belong here." "Neither did my husband and boys," she replied, her voice now fully transformed into the hollow echo we'd heard in the mist. "But the war took them anyway. At least here, families stay together." "Your family is gone," Beth said gently. "They died in the war over 160 years ago. You need to let them rest in peace." The woman, Jenny McClure, shook her head violently. "They're not dead. They're just lost. If I keep looking, if I keep calling for them, they'll find their way home." "You've been looking for over a century," I said. "Jenny, they're not coming back." Her scream of anguish shook the walls of the cabin. The windows rattled, the fire flickered, and all the people at the table looked up with their empty eyes. "I won't give up," she cried. "I won't stop looking, and I won't let anyone else give up either." The cabin began to shake and blur around us. The warm yellow light turned cold and gray, and I could see through the walls to the mist outside. The whole thing was an illusion, a memory of how the place used to be. But David was still there, still looking at me with those terrible empty eyes. "How do I save him?" I asked Beth desperately. "I don't think you can," she said quietly. "Not by fighting her. She's too strong here, too connected to this place." "Then how?" Beth looked at Jenny McClure, who was now fully transformed back into the pale, hollow-eyed thing we'd seen by the creek. Maybe we help her find what she's really looking for. Her family's dead. There's nothing to find. No, Beth said slowly. But maybe there's something to let go of. She was right. Jenny wasn't really looking for her family anymore. She was looking for permission to stop looking, to finally rest. But she'd been alone with her grief for so long, she'd forgotten how to let go. I thought about my own relationship with David, how my guilt over the divorce and my failures as a father had driven a wedge between us, how that guilt made me vulnerable to this thing's manipulation. Maybe the only way to save David was to help Jenny do what she should have done 160 years ago: say goodbye. The cabin continued to blur and fade around us until we were back in the ruined clearing, surrounded by thick mist and the sound of crying. Jenny McClure stood in the center of it all, no longer trying to look human. She was pale as moonlight, her hair hanging in wet tangles, her dress torn and muddy from a century of searching. But for the first time, I really looked at her face. Under the madness and the supernatural horror, I saw something I recognized. The look of a parent who'd lost their child. The same look I'd seen in the mirror after every fight with David, every missed phone call, every time I'd chosen work over being there for him. "Jenny," I said quietly, "I know what you're feeling." She turned those black, empty eyes toward me. "You don't know anything. I have a son, too. I've made mistakes, hurt him, pushed him away. I know what it's like to be afraid you've lost someone you love." "My boys went to war," she said, her voice breaking. "They promised they'd come home. I waited and waited, but they never did." "Because they couldn't," Beth said gently. "They died serving their country. They didn't choose to leave you. Then why didn't they send word? Why didn't they write?" I thought about what I knew of the Civil War, especially battles fought in West Virginia. Communication was poor, record-keeping was worse. Families often never learned what happened to their sons and husbands. "They probably tried," I said. "But wars are chaos. Messages get lost. People get separated from their units. They might have written dozens of letters that never reached you." Jenny's face crumpled with grief. "I just wanted to know what happened to them. I wanted to bury them properly, to say goodbye." Around us in the mist, I could see the figures of all the people she'd trapped, David among them. They were all watching, waiting to see what would happen next. "You can still say goodbye," Beth said. "You don't need their bodies for that. But they're lost out there somewhere. They're calling for me just like I'm calling for them." "No, Jenny. The only voices calling in this hollow are the ones you've trapped. Your family found their peace a long time ago. You're the one who's lost." Jenny let out another wail of anguish, and the mist swirled around us like a storm. But I stood my ground. "I know it hurts," I said. "Letting go of someone you love is the hardest thing in the world. But holding on too tight doesn't bring them back. It just keeps you from living." I looked at the David figure standing motionless in the mist. I've been holding on too tight too. Holding on to my guilt, my regret, my fear that I'd lost my son forever. But that's not love. That's selfishness. "I can't let them go," Jenny whispered. "If I stop looking for them, if I stop calling their names, then they're really gone." "They're already gone," I said as gently as I could. "But that doesn't mean they didn't love you. It doesn't mean your love for them doesn't matter. Love doesn't die, Jenny, even when people do." For a moment, the mist cleared slightly. I could see Jenny more clearly, not as a monster or a supernatural threat, but as a mother and wife who'd suffered an unimaginable loss. "I'm so tired," she said quietly. "I've been searching for so long." "Then rest," Beth said. "Let yourself rest." "But who will remember them? Who will say their names?" "Their names are carved on that tree." I pointed toward where we'd found the oak with all the inscriptions. "People remember them. People remember you too, Jenny McClure. Your story, your love for your family, that's your real memorial." Jenny looked around at all the figures trapped in her grief. Decades of people who'd heard their loved ones' voices and followed them into the hollow. "If I let go," she said, "what happens to them?" "They go home," I said. "They go back to their real lives, their real families." "And what happens to me?" I thought about that. I didn't know much about ghosts or spirits, but I knew about grief. You get to see your family again, the real them, not echoes and shadows. Jenny was quiet for a long time. Around us, the mist began to thin. I could see the edges of the clearing, the ruined cabin foundation, the stone chimney standing alone among the trees. "I don't know. How?" she finally said. "I don't remember how to let go." "It's like forgiving," I said, thinking about my relationship with David. "You just decide to stop carrying the weight," Jenny looked at each of the trapped figures. David, Mike's brother Tommy, all the others. "I'm sorry," she said to them. "I was just so lonely. I just wanted my family back." One by one, the figures began to fade, not disappearing, but becoming more real, more solid, more alive. The empty look left their eyes, replaced by confusion and then relief. David blinked and looked around, seeing me for the first time with clear, focused eyes. "Dad, how did I get here? I was driving to find you, and then... I don't remember." "It's okay," I said, pulling him into a hug. "You're safe now." Around us, the other trapped souls began to wake up too. They looked confused and scared, but alive. Really alive. Jenny McClure stood in the center of the clearing, no longer pale and terrifying. She looked like a tired woman in an old dress, ready to finally go to sleep. "Thank you," she said to me, "for helping me remember how to say goodbye." She closed her eyes and spoke 3 names: James McClure, Robert McClure, William McClure, Thomas McClure. Her husband and 3 sons. "I love you. I'll see you soon." A warm wind blew through the clearing, carrying with it the scent of spring flowers instead of November frost. Jenny McClure smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her, and faded away like morning mist. The fog lifted all at once, revealing a perfectly normal West Virginia hollow in late afternoon sunlight. The trapped people stood around looking lost and confused, but they were all breathing, all alive. "Let's get everyone out of here," Beth said, already calling for backup on her radio. That was 6 months ago. David and I spent the ride back to town talking, really talking, for the first time in years. He told me he'd been having dreams about me being in danger, dreams so real he'd driven halfway across the state to find me. We've been talking regularly ever since, working on rebuilding what I'd almost lost. The other people who'd been trapped in the hollow all recovered completely, though most of them had no memory of their time there. Mike Brennan stopped hunting alone and started going to grief counseling. The hollow itself became quiet, just another valley in the West Virginia mountains. I still do search and rescue work, but I've learned something important. Sometimes the people who need rescuing most aren't lost in the wilderness. Sometimes they're lost in their own grief, their own guilt, their own fear of letting go. And sometimes helping them find their way home means helping them say goodbye to what they can't change, so they can hold on to what really matters. I keep Jenny McClure's story in my case files, not as an official report, but as a reminder. Love doesn't end when someone dies. But if you hold on too tight to grief, you can trap yourself in a hollow place where nothing grows and nothing changes. The real memorial to the people we've lost isn't keeping their pain alive forever. It's living the kind of life that would make them proud, loving the people who are still here while we still can. My name is John Steel Creek, and I've learned that sometimes the most important rescue you can make is helping someone, even yourself, find the courage to let go. My name is Clayton Whitmore, and I've been a park ranger for 18 years. I've seen lost hikers, rescued climbers, and found bodies that families never wanted to see again. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened in Devil's Backbone Hollow that September. I thought I knew these mountains. The George Washington National Forest in Virginia has been my home since I was 26. Every trail, every creek, every dangerous drop-off. I know where the black bears den and which ridges get hit by lightning. People trust me to keep them safe out here. But that trust got harder to carry after Emma died. My daughter drowned in the Shenandoah River 5 years ago. She was 7, same age as most of the kids I end up searching for when they wander off from their families. Emma had my blue eyes and her mother's stubborn streak. She loved picking wildflowers and chasing butterflies. The day she died, I was supposed to be watching her. Instead, I was reading a newspaper on the riverbank. By the time I looked up, she was face down in the water, 20 feet downstream. The current had been so quiet I never heard her fall in. My wife Sarah left me 2 years later. Said I'd become a ghost myself, always looking for something I'd never find. She wasn't wrong. Ever since Emma died, I've thrown myself into missing person cases. 94% success rate, best in the state. But every time I find a lost child, I see Emma's face. Every time I don't, I die a little more inside. That's why I didn't believe in the stories about Devil's Backbone Hollow. Ghost children, they called them. Kids who died in some mining accident back in the 1920s, still playing in the ruins. Old-timers would whisper about hearing laughter echoing from empty buildings, about children's handprints appearing on dusty windows. Grief plays tricks on the mind, I always said. People see what they need to see. I was wrong about that. Dead wrong. It started on September 23, 1976. The leaves were just beginning to turn, and there was frost on my cabin window when I woke up. The radio crackled to life around 6:30 a.m. A little girl had gone missing near the old mining settlement in Devil's Backbone Hollow. Annie Fletcher, 8 years old. Brown hair, green eyes, wearing a red jacket, and carrying a yellow backpack. Last seen around 3:47 p.m. the previous day, playing near the creek while her parents set up camp. They'd reported her missing at 6:15 p.m. when she didn't come back for dinner. I'd been down to Devil's Backbone exactly twice in 18 years. Both times to recover bodies, a hunter who'd had a heart attack and a teenager who'd fallen down a mine shaft. The place always felt wrong somehow. Too quiet. Even the birds didn't sing there. The hollow sat 12 miles off Route 211 down a dirt road that wound through thick pine forest. No cell towers, no radio contact once you dropped into the valley. The old mining company had pulled out in 1924 after some kind of accident, leaving behind rusted equipment and abandoned shacks that were slowly being swallowed by kudzu and Virginia creeper. When I arrived at the Fletcher campsite that morning, the parents looked like they hadn't slept. Mrs. Fletcher had been crying so hard her eyes were nearly swollen shut. Mr. Fletcher kept pacing in small circles, asking the same questions over and over. Where could she go? Why would she leave? She knows better than to wander off. I'd heard those questions 100 times before. Parents always think their kids know better. But kids are curious, and 8-year-olds especially will follow anything interesting. A butterfly, a strange sound, another child playing in the distance. We'll find her, I told them, though something in my gut was already warning me this case would be different. Kids her age don't usually go far, probably just got turned around and is waiting for us somewhere safe. But as I started my search pattern, I noticed the wrongness immediately. The temperature in the hollow was at least 20 degrees colder than on the ridge above. My breath came out in little white puffs, even though it was 60 degrees at the ranger station. And the silence was absolute. No bird songs, no insect buzz, no squirrels chattering, just the crunch of frost-dead leaves under my boots and the distant sound of water trickling over rocks. I found Annie's backpack 15 minutes into the search. It was sitting neatly on a flat rock beside the creek, like someone had placed it there on purpose. No signs of struggle, no torn fabric, no footprints in the soft mud nearby. Just the backpack, with her school notebooks still inside and a half-eaten peanut butter sandwich. That's when I knew something was very, very wrong. I radioed for backup, though the static was so bad I could barely make out the response. Within 2 hours, we had 12 searchers combing the area, state police, volunteer firefighters, and 3 other rangers. We brought in the K9 units from Winchester, 2 German shepherds named Rex and Sally who'd found dozens of missing people over the years, but the dogs wouldn't work. Rex whined and pulled backward the moment we tried to lead him into the hollow proper. Sally flat out refused, planting her paws and refusing to budge when her handler tugged the leash. Both dogs kept looking over their shoulders, like something was following us that we couldn't see. "Never seen anything like it," said handler Jim Morrison, scratching Rex behind the ears. "These dogs will track through anything, swamps, snow, even into caves, but they act like there's something down there that scares them." I tried to push the thought away. Dogs were sensitive to things humans missed. Gas leaks, unstable ground, wild animals. There had to be a logical explanation. But then we found the footprints, small, bare feet pressed into the frost near the old mine office. Child-sized, maybe 6 or 7 years old. But here's what made my skin crawl. There were dozens of them, all different sizes, scattered around the ruins like a group of kids had been playing tag in the night. The problem was, no children had been reported in the area for weeks. The Fletcher family was camping 2 miles away, and Annie had been wearing shoes when she disappeared. "Could be from earlier this week," suggested Ranger Beth Morrison, though her voice didn't sound convinced. Beth was 8 years younger than me, smart as a whip, and didn't scare easily. We'd worked together on dozens of searches, and I'd never seen her look nervous before. But she was nervous now. We all were. As the afternoon wore on, we started hearing things, laughter, faint and distant, echoing off the mountain walls, children's voices singing playground songs, Ring Around the Rosie, and London Bridge. The sound seemed to come from the abandoned mining buildings, but every time we got close enough to investigate, the singing would stop. "Could be an echo," I said, though I didn't believe it myself. Sound travels weird in valleys like this. Around 4 p.m., we made the discovery that changed everything. State investigator Frank Torres was searching the old mine foreman's office, a small wooden building that had been sealed up since the 1920s. The door was padlocked, the windows boarded over. But when Frank pried off one of the boards, he found something impossible. Annie's red jacket was hanging on a coat hook inside the office, not just sitting there, hanging neatly like someone had taken it off and put it away properly. But here's the thing. The jacket looked old, weathered, like it had been hanging there for decades. "That's impossible," Beth whispered when Frank called us over. "We found her backpack just this morning. How could her jacket be in a building that's been sealed for 50 years? I didn't have an answer. I touched the fabric with one finger. It felt dry and brittle, like cloth that had been aging in a damp place for years. But Mrs. Fletcher had described that exact jacket when she gave us Annie's description. Red with yellow trim, size 8, with a small tear near the left pocket where Annie had caught it on a fence. The tear was there, exactly where it should be. That's when Tommy Breslin disappeared. We'd expanded the search to include the campground at Shenandoah Creek, thinking maybe Annie had tried to walk there for help. Tommy was 9 years old, camping with his uncle while his parents were getting divorced. He'd been helping with the search, carrying water bottles and staying close to the adults like a good kid. Then he was just gone. One minute he was standing next to the old mining equipment, asking questions about how the machines worked. The next minute his uncle was calling his name, panic rising in his voice. "Tommy? Tommy? Where are you?" We found his baseball cap caught on a piece of rusted metal near the mine entrance, the same mine entrance where we'd heard the children singing. By sunset, we had 2 missing children and no logical explanation for either disappearance. The state police wanted to call in the FBI, but the sheriff convinced them to give us until morning. "Local knowledge," he said. "Rangers know these mountains better than anyone." I wish that was true. But standing in Devil's Backbone Hollow as darkness fell, watching our flashlight beams dance across empty buildings and rusted machinery, I felt like I didn't know anything at all. That's when I heard Emma's voice. It was faint, mixed in with the other children's laughter that seemed to drift through the valley like fog. But I knew my daughter's laugh. I'd heard it every day for 7 years. And she was calling my name. "Daddy? "Daddy, come play with us. We're having so much fun down here." My flashlight beam began to dim, even though I'd put in fresh batteries that morning. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath, and suddenly the hollow was filled with the sound of children playing, dozens of them, laughing and singing and calling to each other in the darkness. Beth grabbed my arm. "Clayton, we need to get out of here. Now." But I couldn't move, because in the beam of my failing flashlight, I could see them. Small figures moving between the buildings. Children in old-fashioned clothes, their faces pale as moonlight. And in the middle of the group, wearing a red jacket with yellow trim, was Annie Fletcher. She waved at me and smiled. Then she pointed toward the mine entrance where more children were emerging from the darkness like flowers blooming in reverse. That's when I realized we weren't dealing with a missing person case anymore. We were dealing with something that shouldn't exist. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those pale faces staring at me from the darkness. Heard Emma's voice calling from a place where the living weren't supposed to go. Beth had seen them too, though neither of us talked about it when we returned to base camp. What were we supposed to say? That we'd found the missing children playing with a group of ghosts? That a mining accident from 50 years ago was somehow connected to current disappearances? Instead, we told the other searchers that we'd lost visibility and would resume at first light. But privately, Beth pulled me aside. "Clayton, what we saw down there." She looked around to make sure no one could hear us. "I've been a ranger for 8 years. I've seen bears, wildcats, even a few crazy people living off the grid. But those weren't people we saw. They were something else." I nodded. My hands were still shaking from the cold. Or from fear. Hard to tell the difference. "We need to find out what happened in that mine," I said. "Whatever's down there, it's connected to the accident in 1924. And it's taking children." We drove to the county courthouse that night, using our ranger credentials to access the historical records. What we found made everything worse. The official report said that 23 children had died in a mine shaft collapse on September 15, 1924. They were part of a school group touring the mining operation when a support beam gave way. But buried deeper in the records, in a folder marked "Confidential," we found the real story. There had been no accident. The mining company had been dumping toxic waste into the underground water system, and when state inspectors arrived for a surprise visit, the company panicked. They flooded the mine shafts to hide the evidence, not knowing that the children were still inside. 23 children, ages 6 to 12, had drowned in poisoned water while the adults above ground told their families it was a tragic accident. The company paid the families to relocate and keep quiet. The local newspaper ran a single story about a mining mishap and then never mentioned it again. The children were buried in unmarked graves and Devil's Backbone Hollow was abandoned. But the children, it seemed, had never left. We returned to the hollow at dawn, armed with more than just search equipment this time. I'd stopped at a Catholic church in town and convinced Father Martinez to lend me some holy water. Beth had called her grandmother, a Cherokee elder, who gave us sage to burn and a small leather pouch filled with something she called protection medicine. "Your grandmother believes in this stuff?" I asked as we hiked down into the valley. "My grandmother is 93 years old and has lived in these mountains her whole life," Beth replied. "She's seen things that would make your hair turn white, and she told me something else. She said the Cherokee never hunted in Devil's Backbone, even before the mining started. They called it a thin place where the world of the living touched the world of the dead. The wrongness hit us immediately when we entered the hollow, the temperature drop, the unnatural silence, the feeling of being watched. But this time, we pushed through it. We found Kelly Hammond's jacket first. She was 6 years old, last seen playing in her backyard in Luray, 20 miles away. Her parents had called the police just after midnight when they realized she wasn't in her bed. But here was her pink windbreaker, hanging neatly beside Annie's red jacket in the sealed mine office. 3 children, 3 jackets, all hanging in a building that had been locked for 50 years. "They're collecting them," Beth whispered. "But why? And where are the children now?" We got our answer when we reached the main mine entrance. The children were waiting for us. Not just 3 or 4, but dozens of them. Some wore clothes from the 1920s, wool knickers and button-up boots. Others wore more modern outfits, though all of them looked faded and dusty. They stood in a perfect semicircle around the mine entrance, their faces pale and their eyes dark as coal. In the center of the group stood a girl who looked about 10 years old. She wore a white dress that might have been pretty once, but now it was stained with something dark and wet. When she smiled, I could see that her teeth were black with coal dust. "Hello, Mr. Clayton," she said, and her voice echoed like she was speaking from the bottom of a deep well. "We've been waiting for you." I tried to speak, but my throat felt like it was full of sand. Beth stepped closer to me, and I could hear her whispering something in Cherokee. Probably a prayer her grandmother had taught her. "We know about your Emma," the girl continued. "She's down here with us now. She told us how much you miss her, how sad you are that you couldn't save her." That's when I saw my daughter. Emma stepped out from behind the group, wearing the same blue dress she'd been buried in. Her hair was still wet, like she'd just come out of the river. And when she smiled at me, my heart broke all over again. "Daddy," she said, "I'm not lonely anymore. All these children are my friends now. We play together every day, and no one ever gets hurt, and no one ever has to go home." "Emma, sweetheart." I took a step toward her, but Beth grabbed my arm. "That's not your daughter," she hissed. "Look at her eyes." I looked, and Beth was right. Emma's eyes had always been bright blue, like summer sky. These eyes were black, like holes in her face. The girl in the white dress laughed, and the sound made my teeth ache. "Emma wants you to stay, Mr. Clayton. She wants you to bring more children down here so she'll have even more friends to play with. Wouldn't you like that?" Behind her, the mine entrance began to glow with a sickly green light. I could hear water dripping somewhere deep inside, and the air smelled like rust and decay and something else, something sweet and rotten that made my stomach turn. "Annie Fletcher," I said, forcing my voice to work. "Tommy Breslin, Kelly Hammond, where are they?" "They're playing," the girl said, "deep down where it's always cool and quiet, where no one can hurt them ever again. They're so happy, Mr. Clayton, just like Emma." The children began to move closer, and I noticed that their feet didn't quite touch the ground. They glided across the frost-covered earth like they were walking on water, and everywhere they stepped, the ground turned black. "Come with us," Emma said, reaching out her hand. "Come play with us forever, Daddy. You don't have to be sad anymore." And for a moment, God forgive me, I wanted to. The guilt I'd carried for 5 years felt like it was crushing my chest, and the thought of never feeling that pain again was almost irresistible. But then Beth started chanting louder in Cherokee, and smoke from the burning sage filled the air. The children recoiled like the smoke was made of acid, and the girl in the white dress hissed like an angry cat. "Run!" Beth shouted. "Clayton, we have to run!" We turned in sprints, Ted up the narrow path leading out of the hollow, the sound of children's laughter following us like a pack of wolves. Behind us, I could hear Emma calling my name, her voice getting farther away with each step. "Daddy, don't leave me again. Daddy, please." But I kept running, tears streaming down my face, because I finally understood what we were dealing with. These weren't ghosts. They were something much worse. They were children who had died in terror and pain, and now they wanted company for their eternal games. We spent the rest of the day researching everything we could find about the mining accident and the children who'd died. Beth called her grandmother again, and I drove to Virginia Tech to talk to Professor Sarah Chen, who specialized in Appalachian folklore. What we learned made my blood run cold. According to Professor Chen, when children die in groups under traumatic circumstances, their spirits sometimes become bound to the location. It's not uncommon in mining towns, she explained. The children don't understand they're dead, so they keep playing, waiting for someone to join them. But Beth's grandmother told us something even worse. When the spirits take living children, she said over the phone, they have 3 days to claim them completely. After that, the living children become spirits too, bound to that place forever. Annie Fletcher had disappeared on September 23rd. It was now September 25th. We had less than 24 hours to save 3 children before they were lost forever. How do we stop them? I asked. Professor Chen shook her head. You'd have to break the binding that keeps them tied to the location. Usually that means addressing the injustice that created the spirits in the first place. Beth's grandmother was more specific. The dead children need proper burial and justice for their murders, but someone who loves them has to go into their realm and bring them peace. Someone who loves them. Someone like a father who'd lost his own child. That night I went back to Devil's Backbone Hollow alone. I know it was stupid. I know I should have waited for backup, called the FBI, or at least taken Beth with me. But I couldn't risk it. If anything happened to her because of my guilt and my ghosts, I'd never forgive myself. The hollow was different after dark. The green light from the mine entrance was brighter, and I could hear music coming from deep underground. Children singing nursery rhymes in voices that echoed like they were at the bottom of a well. The children were waiting for me. All of them this time, not just the 23 who'd died in 1924, but every child who'd been taken over the years. I counted at least 30, ranging in age from maybe 5 years old to 12. Some I recognized from missing person reports, kids who'd vanished from campgrounds and hiking trails over the decades. And in the front row, holding hands with a boy who looked like he was from the 1950s, was Emma. You came back, said the girl in the white dress. Up close, I could see that her name was embroidered on her collar, Mary Catherine Price. We knew you would. Parents always come back for their children. Let them go, I said. The living ones, Annie, Tommy, Kelly, they don't belong here. Mary Catherine tilted her head like a curious bird. But they're having so much fun. And Emma missed you so much. She cried for months after she drowned, calling for her daddy to save her. Now you can be together forever. The mine entrance gaped behind her like a hungry mouth, and I could see deeper into it now. There were rooms down there, carved out of the rock, where children played eternal games with toys made of bone and shadow. Water dripped constantly from the ceiling, and the walls were covered with drawings, stick figures of families that would never be complete. I can't save Emma, I said, and the words felt like they were tearing my throat open. She's gone. She's been gone for 5 years, but I can save the others. Mary Catherine's face twisted with rage. No, we need them. We've been alone for so long, and it's cold down there in the dark. The living children are warm. They make us remember what it felt like to be alive. The temperature around me dropped so fast that ice began forming on my jacket. My breath came out in thick white clouds, and the ground beneath my feet started to crack with frost. Emma, I called out. Sweetheart, I know you're scared. I know you're angry at me for not saving you. But these other children have families who love them. They need to go home. My daughter stepped forward, water still dripping from her hair and dress. Why didn't you save me, Daddy? You were supposed to take care of me. You were supposed to protect me. And there it was. The guilt I'd been carrying for 5 years, spoken aloud by the ghost of my little girl. Because I wasn't paying attention, I said. Because I was reading the newspaper instead of watching you play. Because I failed you in the worst way a father can fail his child. Emma's black eyes filled with tears that looked like river water. I called for you when I fell in. I called and called, but you didn't hear me. I know, baby. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The other children were getting restless, moving closer, their cold presence making the air around me thick as syrup. Some of them looked angry, others just desperately sad. All of them looked hungry for the warmth of the living. But Emma, I continued, these children aren't me. They don't deserve to be trapped here because of my mistake. Let them go, and I'll stay. I'll play with you forever, and you'll never be alone again. Mary Catherine smiled, showing those coal-black teeth. Yes, that's what we want. The guilty one stays, and the innocent ones can go. But Emma shook her head. No, Daddy. I don't want you to be trapped, ped like us. I want you to live. I want you to help other children who get lost, like you tried to help me." She turned to Mary Catherine and the other ghost children. "We can't keep taking the living ones. It's wrong. We know it's wrong. But we're so lonely," Mary Catherine wailed, and her voice was like wind through a broken window. "And it's so cold in the deep places." "Then maybe it's time to stop being lonely," Emma said gently. "Maybe it's time to go where it's warm." That's when I understood what I had to do. I pulled out my phone and called the one person who might be able to help, Father Martinez from the Catholic Church. It was past midnight, but he answered on the second ring. "Father, it's Clayton Whitmore. I need you to perform a funeral service, right now, for 23 children who died in 1924. There was a pause. "Mr. Whitmore, are you all right? You sound—" "Father, I'm in Devil's Backbone Hollow, and I'm surrounded by the spirits of children who were murdered 50 years ago. They need proper burial rites so their souls can rest. Can you do that over the phone?" Another pause. Then, "I'll do what I can, Catholic or not. I don't think it matters. They just need someone to acknowledge that their deaths were unjust and that they deserve peace." What followed was the strangest funeral service I've ever attended. Father Martinez spoke the words of blessing and farewell while I stood in a circle of ghost children, some of whom had been dead for decades. He prayed for their souls and asked God to grant them the peace they'd been denied in life. As he spoke, something changed in the air. The oppressive cold began to lift, and the green light from the mine entrance grew softer, warmer. The children looked up at the sky, wonder replacing the hunger in their faces. "I can see it," whispered a boy in overalls who must have died in the 1930s. "I can see the light." One by one, they began to fade. Not disappearing, but becoming transparent, like morning mist touched by sunlight. The youngest ones went first, their faces peaceful as they dissolved into sparkles of light that drifted up toward the stars. Mary Catherine was one of the last to go. She looked at me with eyes that were brown again instead of black and smiled a child's innocent smile. "Thank you for helping us go home," she said. Then she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of flowers. Emma was the very last. She hugged me, and for a moment I could feel her warmth, could smell her strawberry shampoo. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered. "Take care of the other lost children for me, okay?" "I will, sweetheart. I promise." Then she was gone too, and I was alone in the hollow with 3 very alive, very frightened children who were blinking in confusion as they found themselves standing in the moonlight instead of in the dark depths of the mine. Annie Fletcher, Tommy Breslin, and Kelly Hammond were all taken to the hospital for observation, but they were physically unharmed. Their memories of the time in the mine were hazy, like half-remembered dreams. They talked about playing games with other children in a place that was always cool and quiet, but the details faded quickly. The official report listed the incident as a case of shared hallucination brought on by hypothermia and disorientation. The children had gotten lost in the abandoned mining tunnels and been found 3 days later, suffering from mild exposure but otherwise healthy. Nobody questioned why 3 children from different locations had all ended up in the same place at the same time. Nobody asked about the impossible evidence: the jackets hanging in a sealed building, the footprints in the frost, the voices heard by multiple witnesses. Sometimes the truth is too strange for official reports. The hollow is different now. The oppressive wrongness is gone, replaced by the normal sounds of a healthy forest. Birds sing there, squirrels chatter in the trees, and the temperature is exactly what it should be for the elevation and season. Beth says her grandmother told her that the thin place has been healed, that the barrier between worlds has strengthened again. Don't pretend to understand the spiritual mechanics of it, but I know that Devil's Backbone Hollow feels peaceful now in a way it never did before. I've been back several times to leave flowers where I think the children were buried. Wildflowers mostly, the kind Emma used to love to pick. Sometimes I sit on the old mining platform and tell them about the families I've reunited, the lost hikers I've guided home. The missing person cases still come, but they're different now. Normal disappearances with normal explanations. People who got turned around on hiking trails or wandered away from campgrounds. I still find them, still bring them home to their families. But now when I look at a lost child's face, I don't see Emma's drowning. I see possibility, hope, a chance to make things right. Sarah called me last month. My ex-wife, I mean. She'd heard about the Fletcher case, about how I'd helped find those missing children. She wanted to have coffee, to talk about things, about Emma, about us, about whether it might be possible to heal some old wounds. I said yes, because Emma was right. I need to live, not just exist. I need to help other children who get lost, and maybe, if I'm lucky, I can help myself get found too. But sometimes, late at night, when the mountain wind blows through the pines just right, I still hear children laughing in the distance. Not the desperate, hungry laughter of trapped spirits, but the joyful sound of kids playing in a place where they're safe and loved and free. And sometimes, if I listen very carefully, I can hear Emma's voice among them, happy and whole and exactly where she's supposed to be. The hollow children found their way home at last. Now it's time for me to find mine. My name is Margaret Grimwald, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been a park ranger in the Cherokee National Forest for 14 years now, and I've seen just about everything these Tennessee mountains can throw at you. Bears, wild boars, copperheads, thick as your arm. None of it scares me anymore. I wasn't always this brave around snakes, though. When I was 7, a copperhead bit me while I was picking blackberries near my grandmother's house. The doctors said I almost died. Maybe that's why I became so interested in studying them later. Fear has a way of turning into fascination if you let it. I have a PhD in herpetology. That's the study of reptiles and amphibians. My specialty is predator control, which means when people have problems with dangerous snakes, they call me. I've published papers on Appalachian snake species, and I pride myself on being able to explain any monster sighting with good old-fashioned science. The summer of 1983 was the hottest on record. The drought had been going on for 3 months, and water levels in all our streams were at historic lows. That's important to remember, because what happened next might not have happened if the water had been normal. I was working in the Laurel Falls area, way back in the Unaka mountain range. It's beautiful country, but remote, 18 miles from the nearest road, and you have to rappel down into the gorge to reach the bottom. The Cherokee used to tell stories about this place. They called it the home of the Uktena, some kind of giant horned serpent with a diamond in its forehead. I never put much stock in old legends. Every culture has monster stories. They're just ways people tried to explain things they didn't understand before science came along. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 2 hikers had been found near Laurel Falls, both in the hospital with some kind of paralysis. They kept talking about a snake big as a telephone pole with antlers like a deer. The doctors said they were hallucinating from heat stroke, but their symptoms didn't match anything I'd seen before. Probably just a timber rattler, I told Jake Morrison, the park superintendent. Big one, though. Drought's been driving them out of their usual spots, making them aggressive. Jake shook his head. These folks weren't just scared, Maggie. They were different, speaking in some language nobody recognized. And their pupils, he shuddered. Their pupils were shaped like slits, like snake eyes. That got my attention. I'd never heard of venom causing that kind of reaction. I decided to investigate personally. I packed my usual gear, snake hooks, collection tubes, anti-venom, camera equipment, and called my partner, Billy Okonostota. Billy's Cherokee, grew up hearing all the old stories, but he's also a trained wildlife technician. Good man to have watching your back in snake country. You sure about this, Maggie? Billy asked as we loaded the truck. My grandmother always said bad things happen when the water gets too low, disturbs things that should stay sleeping. I laughed. Billy, your grandmother probably said bad things happen when you don't eat your vegetables too. Let's stick to science, okay? But even as I said it, I felt something cold in my stomach. Maybe it was just the heat, but as we drove deeper into the forest, I noticed how quiet everything was. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects seemed muted. The silence felt wrong somehow, like the whole forest was holding its breath. The hike down to Laurel Falls took 3 hours. Billy and I moved carefully, checking for snake sign every few yards. What we found didn't make sense. Rattlesnake scales were scattered everywhere, but they were huge, some as big as silver dollars. And they had an odd shimmies, or to them, like oil on water. I'd never seen anything like it in 14 years of field work. These aren't from any species I know, I told Billy, sealing some samples in collection tubes. We'll have to send them to the lab. Billy picked up one of the larger scales and turned it over in his palm. My great-uncle Joe used to say the Uctena's scales could hypnotize you if you stared at them too long. Billy, I know, science. He dropped the scale. But Maggie, look around. Where are all the regular snakes? This is prime copperhead habitat, but I haven't seen a single one. It's like they all just left. He was right. The drought should have concentrated reptiles around the remaining water sources, but the area was deserted. Even the usual lizards and salamanders were missing. We found the first victim's campsite around noon. The tent was still standing, but something had torn through the fabric in long, parallel slashes. The cuts were too clean for claws, too wide for any normal snake's teeth. Inside the tent, we found a camera with the lens cracked and the metal body partially melted. The memory card was intact, though. When I checked the last photos, my hands started shaking. The images were blurry, obviously taken in panic, but they showed something that shouldn't exist. A massive, serpentine form, easily 30 feet long, with what looked like antlers growing from its skull. In one photo, you could clearly see a glowing, diamond-shaped mark on its forehead. Jesus Christ, I whispered. Billy looked over my shoulder and went very still. That's it. That's exactly how my grandfather described it. We found more evidence as we moved toward the falls. Acid burns on rocks where no acid should be. Trees with their bark stripped away in spiral patterns as if something huge had wrapped around them. And everywhere that sweet, cloying smell like overripe fruit mixed with musk. The smell got stronger as we approached the main pool at the base of the falls. What used to be a deep swimming hole was now just a muddy depression with a few inches of water. But the limestone around it was etched with patterns that looked almost deliberate, like writing. Maggie, Billy's voice was tight with fear. Listen. At first I didn't hear anything. Then it started. A deep, rhythmic rattling sound that seemed to come from underground. It was so low I felt it in my chest more than heard it. My equipment registered it at 120 decibels, but I couldn't locate the source. That's when we saw Amy Chen, our graduate student intern, stumbling toward us from the far side of the pool. Her face was pale as paper, and her pupils were dilated almost to black. Dr. Grimwald, she called, but her voice sounded strange, flat. You need to see this. You need to understand. She led us to a cave opening I'd never noticed before, perfectly circular and smooth, as if it had been bored by machine tools. The edges were still wet with some kind of acidic residue that made my eyes water. It spoke to me, Amy said calmly. In here, it showed me things, about the old times before people came, about what lives under the mountains. Billy grabbed my arm. We need to leave, now. But Amy was already walking toward the cave entrance, and I couldn't let her go alone. Against every instinct screaming in my head, I followed her into the darkness. The tunnel sloped down steeply, widening as it went. Our flashlight beams revealed walls that looked melted rather than carved, and everywhere that overwhelming smell of rotting fruit and ancient musk. After maybe 50 yards, the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. Our lights couldn't reach the far walls or ceiling. In the center was a pool of black water, perfectly still. That's when I saw it properly for the first time. The creature was coiled around the far side of the pool like a living mountain, 40 feet long at least, with scales that shifted color in our flashlight beams. The antlers, Bill, his grandfather had described, were real, massive, branching things that looked like they belonged on an elk. And the diamond on its forehead wasn't a growth or marking, it was an eye, a third eye that pulsed with its own cold light. The creature's head turned toward us with liquid grace. When our eyes met, the world changed. Suddenly I was seeing the forest as it had been centuries ago, before roads and power lines and park boundaries. I saw Cherokee hunting parties making offerings at the pool above. I saw the thing they called Uktena, guardian of the water, keeper of the balance, and I saw what had awakened it from its long sleep, the dying streams, the poisoned groundwater, the slow strangulation of the land it had protected for 1,000 years. When the vision ended, I was on my knees in the mud, and Amy was gone. We searched for Amy for 6 hours before Billy forced me to call for help. The rescue team found her at dawn the next day, sitting calmly by the pool above, speaking in what the Cherokee linguist identified as a dialect that had been dead for 2 centuries. She remembered nothing about the cave or what she'd seen there, but her pupils stayed slit-shaped for 3 days, and she could identify snake species by scent alone from across a room. Dr. Stevens, my department head back at the university, threatened to fire me when I filed my report. Hallucinations, heat stroke, and professional hysteria, he called it. Find me a rational explanation or find another job. But the lab results on those scales came back, and they weren't rational at all. Unknown protein structure, genetic markers that didn't match any known reptile family, chemical compounds that shouldn't exist in nature. More hikers started disappearing. 3 in the next week, all found in the same catatonic state, all speaking languages they'd never learned. The media picked up on it. Suddenly, our quiet forest was crawling with cryptozoology enthusiasts and paranormal investigators. Jake Morrison was under pressure to close the entire area, but the governor's office wanted answers first. Tourist money was at stake. That's when I called in Elder Mary Crow Feather, Billy's great-aunt, and a respected Cherokee spiritual leader. If there was something to the old stories, she would know. Mary listened to our account without interruption, nodding occasionally. When we finished, she was quiet for a long time. The Uktena isn't evil, she said finally. It's balance, water and earth, predator and protector. But when the balance is broken, she shook her head. It becomes something else, something hungry. She explained that according to tradition, the Uktena could shift between the physical and spiritual worlds. It could manipulate time and space, control weather, and yes, it could transform humans into vessels for its will. The last time it woke up fully was during the drought of 1887, Mary told us. 7 railroad men found petrified near what's now the falls. People said they looked like they'd been turned to stone while still alive. I thought about Amy's empty expression, her strange new abilities. How do we stop it? You don't stop it. You negotiate. Give it what it needs, or... Mary's weathered face was grim. Or it takes what it wants. The next day, Billy and I went back to the cave with recording equipment and more sophisticated measuring devices. What we found there made me question everything I thought I knew about biology. The creature had grown. What had been 40 feet of snake was now closer to 50. Its diamond eye pulsed brighter, and the walls around the pool showed fresh acid scarring. Most disturbing of all, the water level had risen significantly despite the ongoing drought. Where was that water coming from? Billy set up the audio equipment while I collected more samples. The sound of the creature's breathing was like wind through a cathedral, deep, rhythmic, hypnotic. Our instruments detected subsonic frequencies that made my teeth ache. That's when it spoke, not out loud. The words formed directly in my mind, in a voice like grinding stone and rushing water. You understand now, Serpent touched. 1. You see what your kind has done to the sacred places. I saw flashes of images, chemical runoff poisoning underground streams, mining operations disrupting ancient cave systems, the slow death of the watershed that had sustained life here for millennia. I have slept through worse times, but this cannot continue. The water must be pure. The balance must be restored. What do you want? I whispered aloud. A guardian. One who understands both worlds, the world of knowing and the world of feeling. You carry the serpent's mark. you could serve. I looked down at the scars on my arms from that childhood copperhead bite. In the strange light of the creature's eye, they seemed to glow. Billy grabbed my shoulder, breaking the connection. "Maggie, we have to go. Now!" The creature was moving, uncoiling from around the pool. Water rose and began to overflow, carrying that overwhelming scent of decay and ancient power. As we ran for the tunnel entrance, I heard something that will haunt me forever, the sound of the creature laughing. It sounded almost human. We made it out just as the chamber began to flood. But I knew the Uktena wasn't trapped down there. It was preparing. That night, every snake within 50 miles began moving toward Laurel Falls. The solar eclipse was 3 days away when I realized the truth about what was happening to me. I'd been having dreams since that first encounter in the cave. Vivid, impossible dreams, where I could see through the eyes of every reptile in the forest. I watched through a copperhead's vision as it slithered past a campsite. I felt the heat-sensing organs of a timber rattler, detecting prey. Most disturbing of all, I could understand what they were feeling, a desperate need to reach the falls, to serve something ancient and powerful. Billy found me one morning sitting by the river talking to a 5-foot rat snake like Wu. They were old friends. When he spoke to me, I realized I'd been speaking to the snake in hisses and tongue flicks, and somehow we'd understood each other perfectly. "It's changing you," Billy said quietly. "The connection you made with it. My great-aunt says the same thing happened to the last guardian back in 1887, a man named Thomas Crowkiller. He could speak with snakes, predict the weather, find water in the desert. But after the eclipse, what happened after the eclipse? Nobody knows. He disappeared into the caves and was never seen again. Some say he's still down there, part of the Uktena now, part of its power." The changes in me were accelerating. My pupils had begun to elongate in bright light. I could smell fear on people from across a room. Most troubling of all, I'd started to see the forest's sickness, the subtle poisoning of the groundwater, the disruption of natural cycles, the slow death of the ecosystem I'd spent my career protecting. Dr. Stevens arrived from the university with a team of skeptics ready to debunk what he called my cryptozoological hysteria. I tried to warn them away, but they insisted on a full investigation of the cave system. The Uktena was waiting for them. The attack happened at dawn on the day before the eclipse. I was monitoring from the surface when I heard the screaming start. By the time Billy and I reached the cave, it was over. Dr. Stevens and 2 graduate students were found in the same catatonic state as the other victims. The 3rd student, a young man named Rick Paulson, was never found at all. The cave walls were scorched with acid, and the smell of sulfur hung heavy in the air. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was finding Stevens' recording equipment, still running. The audio captured everything, the creature's full manifestation, its rage at the intrusion, and its declaration of intent. In that grinding, ancient voice, it spoke of the coming eclipse, when the barriers between worlds would be thinnest, when it could finally leave the caves and reclaim the poisoned land above. "The Starnad, serpent-touched one, will guide me," it said. "Through her, I will cleanse the waters. Through her, I will restore the balance." I realized then that I wasn't just being changed. I was being prepared. When the eclipse came, the Uktena would use me as a conduit to enter the physical world permanently. Mary Crowfeather arrived that evening with 4 other Cherokee elders, carrying bundles of sage and cedar, bags of sacred tobacco, and something wrapped in deerskin that she wouldn't let anyone else see. "There is a way," she told us, "but it requires sacrifice. The creature bonds with those who carry the serpent's mark, those who have survived its venom and been changed by it. That bond can be used to trap it, but only during the eclipse, and only by someone willing to take its place as guardian." "Take its place how?" I asked, though I think I already knew. "The way Thomas Crowkiller did. Join with it completely. Become part of the mountain, part of the water, part of the balance. You would live, but not as you are now. Billy stepped forward. There has to be another way. Mary's eyes were sad but certain. The balance must be maintained. That is the old agreement, the first agreement. Someone must always guard the sacred places. As the sun set on the day before the eclipse, I made my decision. The creature knew I was coming. It was waiting in the flooded chamber, bigger than ever, its diamond eye blazing with anticipation. The water had risen to cover half the cave floor, and I could feel the power building in the air like electricity before a storm. You come to fulfill the bargain, it said in my mind. Good. When the sun dies tomorrow, we will be one. Through your knowledge and my power, we will heal this broken land. I stepped into the warm, strange-smelling water and walked toward the ancient serpent that would either save the forest or destroy everything I'd ever loved. The eclipse had begun. The Cherokee ceremony lasted all night. As the moon passed in front of the sun, Mary and the other elders created a sacred circle around the pool above the cave, burning offerings and chanting in the old language. Billy stood with them, adding his voice to theirs. Down in the flooded chamber, I felt the Uktana's consciousness pressing against mine like a tide. It showed me visions of the forest as it could be, streams running clean and cold, wildlife thriving in perfect balance, the poisoned places made whole again. But it also showed me what it had become in its anger and isolation. Something that saw humans as a plague to be eliminated, not partners in the stewardship of the land. As the eclipse reached totality, the creature began to merge with me. I felt my identity dissolving, becoming part of something vast and ancient and furious. For a terrifying moment, I understood why it wanted to cleanse the land of human presence entirely. Then Mary's voice reached me, calling in Cherokee and English, "Remember who you are, Maggie Grimwald. Remember what you protect." I thought of Billy, of Amy, of all the students I'd taught to love and respect the natural world. I thought of my grandmother's garden, of the first snake I'd ever held without fear, of every small victory in the fight to preserve wild places. And I fought back. The battle wasn't physical. It was a war of wills, of purposes, of understanding. The Uktana wanted to return the land to an imagined purity that had never really existed. I wanted to heal it while honoring both the natural world and the people who were part of it. In the end, we found a compromise. When the eclipse ended and sunlight returned to the chamber, the Uktana and I were still separate beings. But we were connected now, bound by mutual respect and shared purpose. It would return to its deep sleep, but I would remain as its voice in the human world, protecting the watershed, monitoring the ecosystem, ensuring that the sacred places stayed sacred. The changes in me were permanent. I can still speak with snakes, still sense the health of the forest in ways no instrument can measure. My eyes remain slightly elongated, and I need less water than normal humans. But I'm still myself, still Maggie Grimwald, still a park ranger with a job to do. Dr. Stevens and the other affected victims recovered completely, though none of them remember their time in the caves. Amy finished her graduate work and now runs an environmental protection program in Montana. Billy and I were married the following spring in a ceremony where both Cherokee traditions and scientific understanding were honored equally. The Laurel Falls area was designated a protected research zone. Officially, it's habitat preservation for an endangered endemic species requiring specialized environmental conditions. The tourism board wasn't happy, but some places are more important than visitor dollars. Every year on the anniversary of the eclipse, I descend into the caves and report to my sleeping partner on the state of our shared domain. The streams run cleaner now. The wildlife populations have stabilized. The balance holds. But I know the Uktana still watches, still waits. If the poisoning ever becomes too severe, if the balance tips too far toward destruction, it will wake again. And next time, it might not be willing to negotiate. I've trained Billy and 3 Cherokee wildlife technicians to recognize the signs, to understand both the scientific and spiritual aspects of what we're protecting. They think I'm preparing them for routine conservation work, I'm actually preparing them for the day when I might not come back from one of my underground meetings. Because that's the thing about balance. It always requires guardians, and guardians don't get to retire. They serve until the mountain calls them home, until they become part of the stone and water and ancient wisdom that keeps the world from forgetting its own sacred nature. I used to think science could explain everything. Now I know it can explain only what it's ready to understand. There's room in this world for both knowledge and mystery, for both protecting the environment and respecting the spirits that dwelt here first. The Uktena sleeps beneath Cherokee National Forest, coiled around an underground lake that reflects stars you can't see from the surface. And I sleep easier, knowing it's there, dreaming of clean water and wild places where the balance still holds true. Some nights, when the moon is dark and the forest is particularly quiet, I can still hear it breathing in the deep places of the earth. The sound is like wind through ancient trees, like water over stone, like the memory of a world that knew how to keep itself whole. And I remember that some mysteries are meant to be protected, not solved. My name is Samuel Riversong, but everyone calls me Sam. I've been a park ranger here in North Carolina's Blue Ridge Mountains for 21 years now. People always ask me about my last name. Yeah, it sounds made up, but it's real. My grandmother was Cherokee, and she gave me that name because she said I'd spend my life watching over flowing waters. She was right about that part. I'm 47 years old, and I've seen a lot in these mountains. Bears that get too close to campers, hikers who think they know better than the trail markers, and storms that can turn a peaceful morning into a nightmare. But I've never seen anything like what happened in October of 1979. That's the year I learned my grandmother's old stories weren't just stories. I worked the section around Grandfather Mountain, mostly protecting the old Cherokee sites from people who think ancient rocks make good souvenirs. It's quiet work, which suits me fine. My wife died 5 years back in a car crash, and my 2 daughters moved away after that. The mountains don't ask questions or expect you to smile when you don't feel like it. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning. I was checking the protected cave site near Rough Ridge when I saw the damage. Someone had broken in during the night. The metal gate we'd installed was bent open like a tin can, and the lock was just gone. Not cut, not picked, just gone. Inside the cave, it was worse. The university folks had been studying some old stone tools there, real careful-like, with all their little brushes and cameras. Now their equipment was scattered around, and some of the artifacts were missing. But here's the weird part. Whoever took them left behind other stone tools, ones I'd never seen before. I picked up one of the new tools and felt my skin crawl. The stone was smooth, almost warm to the touch, and carved with symbols that looked familiar but wrong at Tao. Same time. Like words you almost remember from a dream. I called Dr. Elena Martinez at the university. She's the lead archaeologist on the project, a small woman with serious eyes who knows more about old rocks than anyone should. When I described what I found, she went quiet for a long time. "Sam," she said finally, "those tools you're describing, they don't match anything we know about Cherokee culture, or any culture in this region. So what are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to take a closer look." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandmother's stories, the ones she told me when I was little. Stories about the moon-eyed people, pale folks with big eyes who lived underground and only came out at night. She said they used to live in these mountains before the Cherokee drove them away, deep into the caves where the sun couldn't find them. Just old stories, I always told myself, mixing up different legends over time. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to the wind in the trees, I noticed something strange. It was completely quiet outside. No owls hooting, no raccoons rustling around, no insects singing. Nothing. In 21 years of living in these mountains, I'd never heard silence that complete. It felt wrong, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I got up and looked out my window. The October moon was almost full, bright enough to turn the trees silver. And there, just at the edge of the tree line, I saw something pale moving between the trunks, too tall to be a deer, too quick to be a person. By the time I got my flashlight and went outside, whatever it was had gone. But the silence stayed until just before dawn, when the normal night sounds slowly returned. The next morning I found tracks in the soft dirt near my cabin. They looked almost human, but too long and too narrow. And the stride was wrong. Each step was now early 4 feet apart, like whoever made them had legs much longer than they should. I measured them carefully and took pictures, the way we're supposed to do with any unusual evidence. But, looking at those photos later, I had to wonder what kind of evidence this really was. Dr. Martinez showed up the next afternoon with 2 of her graduate students, Amy Chen and Rick Morrison. Amy was quiet and careful, the kind of student who double-checked everything. Rick was louder, always making jokes to cover up how nervous he got in tight spaces. We went into the cave together, and I showed them the stone tools that had been left behind. Dr. Martinez examined them with her magnifying glass, frowning deeper with each one she picked up. "These are incredible," she whispered. "The craftsmanship is far beyond what we'd expect from any prehistoric culture in this area. Look at these symbols." She pointed to the carved marks on the tools. They looked like letters, but not from any alphabet I knew. Some were straight lines and circles, others curved like flowing water or snake tracks. "Any chance these are fake?" I asked. "Someone playing a prank?" Rick laughed nervously. "Who would fake Stone Age tools, and how would they make them look this old?" Amy was measuring everything, writing notes in her careful handwriting. "Dr. Martinez, these tool marks on the cave wall, they're fresh, made in the last few days, but the technique is all wrong for modern tools." We spent hours in that cave, going deeper than the official surveys had mapped. The passages twisted and branched, leading down into the mountain like the roots of a massive tree. And the further we went, the stranger things got. The temperature dropped way below what caves usually maintain. My breath started showing in little puffs. There were patches of pale fungi growing on the walls, giving off a faint light that made everything look sickly. And there was a smell, sweet and metallic, like old copper pennies mixed with something organic. It got stronger the deeper we went. "We should head back," I told them. "It's getting late, and these passages aren't on any of our safety maps." But Dr. Martinez wanted to explore just a little further. We found ourselves in a large chamber, maybe 60 feet across, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above us. Our flashlight beams showed smooth stone walls covered in more of those strange symbols. And that's when Amy screamed. In the far corner of the chamber, she'd found bones, human bones, arranged in a careful spiral pattern. But they weren't ancient. Some still had bits of clothing attached. "We need to call the police," Dr. Martinez said, her voice shaking. "This is a crime scene." I was already backing toward the passage we'd come from, every instinct telling me to get out of there fast. But Rick had found something else. "Look at this," he called from the other side of the chamber. "There's another passage here, and it goes down even further. And guys, there's light coming from down there." We all turned to look. Sure enough, there was a faint glow coming from the depths, pale and cold like moonlight. "Probably just more of that fungi," Dr. Martinez said, but her voice didn't sound convinced. That's when we heard it, a sound like singing, but not in any language I knew. It seemed to come from the stones themselves, low and haunting, and somehow hungry. "We're leaving," I said. "Right now." Nobody argued. We made it back to the cave entrance, just as the sun was setting. The normal sounds of evening were starting up, birds settling in for the night, insects beginning their chorus. But as we drove away, I looked back and saw pale shapes moving near the cave mouth. Too tall to be people, too quick to be anything natural. That night, Amy called me at home, her voice tight with fear. "Mr. Riversong? Rick didn't come back to the hotel. His room is empty, and his car is still in the parking lot. I think he went back to the city, Av." I was already reaching for my keys and radio. "Call Dr. Martinez, tell her to contact the police. I'm going to look for him." But deep in my gut, I knew we were already too late. The cave entrance stood open like a mouth in the moonlight. My flashlight beam showed Rick's footprints in the dirt, leading straight into the darkness. But there were other prints too, those long, narrow tracks I'd found by my cabin. And Rick's prints stopped halfway into the first passage, like he'd just vanished. The police came at dawn, along with a search and rescue team from Asheville. I guided them into the cave, but we couldn't find any trace of Rick past that first passage. It was like the mountain had swallowed him whole. Detective Sarah Williams took charge of the investigation. She was young, but sharp, asking the right questions and taking detailed notes. When I showed her the bone spiral we'd found, her face went pale. "How old do you think these are?" she asked Dr. Martinez. "Based on the clothing fragments, maybe 6 months. But Mr. Riversong, you said there have been missing hikers in this area." I nodded. 3 in the past year. We figured they got lost, maybe fell down a cliff. Happens more than people think in mountains like these. Detective Williams was photographing everything, but her camera kept malfunctioning in the deeper chambers. The flash would fire, but the pictures came out as pure white or completely black. That's when Joseph Crow Dog arrived. Joseph was an elder from the Cherokee community, maybe 70 years old, but still strong as an oak tree. He'd heard about the missing student and came to help with the search. But when I described what we'd found in the cave, his expression changed to something I'd never seen before. Fear. "You need to seal this cave," he told me quietly, away from the others. "Tonight, before the moon gets full." "Joseph, we can't seal a crime scene. There's a missing person. There's going to be more missing people if you don't listen." He grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Samuel, your grandmother told you the old stories. You know what lives down there." I wanted to argue, but the words stuck in my throat. Because part of me, the part that remembered sitting by the fire while my grandmother spoke of the moon-eyed people, knew he was right. That afternoon, Dr. Martinez made another discovery. She'd been studying the stone tools we'd found, and she'd figured out what some of the symbols meant. "They're not random marks," she explained, spreading her notes across my desk. "They're a calendar, a lunar calendar tracking the moon phases with incredible precision. And according to this, tonight is significant." "Significant how?" "Tonight the moon reaches perfect fullness, and if I'm reading this correctly, it's a feeding time." Detective Williams overheard and came over to look. "What do you mean, feeding time?" Dr. Martinez pointed to a series of symbols that looked like stick figures around a larger shape. "This appears to show some kind of ritual or ceremony. People gathering around something. And it happens every full moon." That night, despite my warnings, Detective Williams insisted on posting officers at the cave entrance. 2 young deputies, Mike Chen and Jessica Torres, volunteered for the overnight watch. I tried to talk them out of it, but Williams was convinced that whoever had taken Rick would return for the bone collection. "If someone's using this cave for occult activities, they'll be back," she said. "We'll be ready." I went home, but I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, my radio crackled to life. "Base, this is Chen. We've got movement near the cave entrance. Multiple figures, but they're not moving right. Over." "Deputy Chen, clarify your report. Over." "They're too tall, Base. And they're not walking. They're flowing. Like water. Jessica, are you seeing this?" Static filled the radio for a long moment. Then Jessica's voice, high and tight, with panic. "Mike, where are you? Mike, answer me!" More static. Then silence. I was in my truck and racing toward the cave before I realized I was moving. The moon was directly overhead, so bright. I didn't need headlights on the mountain roads. I found their patrol car empty, doors hanging open, radios still crackling with static. Their flashlights lay scattered on the ground, still burning. But there were no signs of struggle, no blood, nothing to show where they'd gone. Just those long, narrow tracks leading into the cave. And something else. A sound coming from deep inside the mountain. That same singing I'd heard before, but louder now, and with more voices joined in harmony. I should have waited for backup, should have called for help. But something was pulling me into that cave, something stronger than common sense. My grandmother's voice seemed to whisper in the darkness. "The moon-eyed people are awake, Samuel, and they remember you." The deeper I went, the brighter the pale light became. The fungi on the walls were glowing like tiny stars, and the singing was getting clearer. I could almost make out words, though they were in no language I knew. In the main chamber, I found them. 7 figures stood in a circle around the bone spiral, each one nearly 7 feet tall with elongated limbs and skin so pale it seemed to glow. Their heads were larger than human heads should be, and their eyes were huge and completely black, like looking into deep water at night. They turned to look at me as I entered, and I felt their gaze like cold fingers on my skin. In the center of their circle, Mike and Jessica knelt motionless. Their own eyes rolled back to show only white. They were alive but not awake, breathing but not there. And beyond them, deeper in the chamber, I could see Rick. Still alive, but changed. His skin had gone pale like theirs, and his eyes were starting to enlarge. One of the moon-eyed people stepped forward and spoke, its voice like wind through stone. "Samuel Riversong, grandson of Mary Singing Waters, you have returned to us." At last. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The moon-eyed person, their leader, I realized, continued speaking in that hollow, ancient voice. "Your grandmother was one of ours, Samuel. Half-blooded, born of the union between your people and mine. She carried our gift, and she passed it to you." "That's impossible," I whispered. But even as I said it, I could feel changes starting in my own body. My vision was getting sharper in the darkness, and the cold didn't bother me anymore. "The surface people have broken the old agreements," the leader said. "They dig where they should not dig, take what they should not take. So we take from them in return." I looked at the deputies, at Rick, at the bone spiral that represented so many missing hikers. "You're killing innocent people. We take only what we need to survive. 1 life per moon, to feed the deep places and keep our people strong. But lately the surface people have grown numerous and careless. They intrude on our sacred places with their machines and their lights." The leader gestured toward the cave walls, where I could now see passages leading off in every direction, a vast network extending throughout the mountains. "We have lived here for 1,000 years, Samuel. Your Cherokee ancestors made peace with us, agreed to honor our territory. But you surface people forget your promises." I thought about all the missing hikers, all the times we'd assumed they'd simply gotten lost. "How many of you are there?" "Enough. We are the true guardians of these mountains, keepers of the deep waters that flow beneath the stone. Without us, the underground rivers would poison and die. Without us, your surface world would wither." The leader extended one pale, elongated hand toward me. "Join us willingly, Samuel. Take your place among your grandmother's people. Help us maintain the balance. And if I refuse, then you become food for the deep places, like the others." I looked again at Mike and Jessica, at Rick's transformed face. My radio was still crackling with static, but no help was coming. No one even knew where I was. But I still had my grandmother's medicine bundle, the small leather pouch she'd given me when I was a child. I'd carried it for 21 years without really believing in its power. Now I reached for it with shaking hands. The leader saw the movement and stepped back, its huge black eyes widening. "Where did you get that?" "My grandmother, Mary Singing Waters." I opened the pouch and scattered the contents, tobacco, sage, small carved stones, in a circle around my feet. The effect was immediate. The moon-eyed people began to wail, a sound like wind through a graveyard. They shrank back from the scattered herbs, and their pale glow dimmed. "She prepared you," the leader said, and for the first time, its voice carried emotion, sadness, and something like respect. She knew this day would come. The deputies blinked and shook their heads, suddenly aware again. Rick's transformation halted, though his skin remained pale and his eyes too large. "The old agreements must be renewed," the leader continued. "The surface people must learn respect, or we will take more than 1 life per moon." I helped Mike and Jessica to their feet, both of them confused and frightened. "There has to be another way. some way for both peoples to coexist. The leader considered this, its ancient head tilting to one side. Perhaps, if the surface people will honor our boundaries, if they will offer what we need without us having to hunt. What do you need? Life energy. Not necessarily death, but the spark of life itself. Your people have many who are dying already, who would trade their last months for a purpose. I thought about the cancer patients at the hospital in Asheville, the elderly in nursing homes, the terminally ill who might choose to give their remaining time to preserve an ancient balance. I could try to arrange something, a partnership, but you have to stop the hunting. The leader looked at its companions, and some silent communication passed between them. Finally, it nodded. 1 moon cycle. We will give you 1 full moon to prove this can work. If you fail, we return to the old ways. And Rick, the deputies, the others you've taken? They will remain as bridges between our peoples, not fully human, not fully moon-eyed. They will help you understand what we need. Rick stepped forward, his voice strange but still recognizably his own. Sam, I can feel what they feel. The deep places under the mountains. They're alive, and they're connected to everything. If they die, the whole ecosystem dies with them. I gathered up my grandmother's scattered medicine, feeling the weight of what I'd agreed to. 1 month to create a partnership between the modern world and an ancient people that most humans didn't even believe existed. But as we made our way back to the surface, I realized I wasn't just Sam Riversong anymore. I was something new, a bridge between 3 worlds, Cherokee, European, and something far older than both. The official report listed deputies Chen and Torres as suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning in the cave, causing temporary disorientation. Rick Morrison was found alive but changed by a rare neurological condition that left him with heightened night vision and photosensitive skin. Dr. Martinez helped create the cover story. The cave was declared hazardous due to toxic gas buildup and sealed with federal approval. Only a few people knew the real truth. Over the following weeks, I worked quietly with Joseph Crow Dog and selected members of the Cherokee Council to establish what we called the Deep Waters Preservation Project. Officially, it was an environmental protection program for underground water systems. Unofficially, it provided a way for terminal patients to contribute to something larger than themselves. The first volunteer was Margaret Hayes, a 78-year-old woman with pancreatic cancer who had maybe 3 months to live. She understood what she was agreeing to when I explained it to her in the careful way I'd learned to use. You're telling me I can spend my last months helping preserve an ancient ecosystem? She said. And in exchange, my life energy will help maintain underground systems that keep the whole mountain healthy? Something like that, yes. She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in months. When do we start? The ceremony took place in a shallow cave chamber, with Joseph Crow Dog performing traditional blessings while the moon-eyed leader waited respectfully in the shadows. Margaret passed peacefully, her final weeks spent learning about underground rivers and ancient responsibilities. And when she died, she became part of something eternal. The hunting stopped. Over the past months, I've changed more than I expected. My skin has patches of pale luminescence that show up in complete darkness. My night vision is perfect now, and I can sense the underground water systems like a network of veins beneath my feet. My daughters think I'm having a midlife crisis. They don't understand why I've become obsessed with environmental protection or why I spend so much time in caves. I can't tell them the truth, not yet. Maybe someday, when they're ready. Dr. Martinez continues her research, but now she studies the real history of this region, the story of cooperation between multiple intelligent species that most archaeologists will never believe. Rick has become our primary liaison with the moon-eyed people, his transformed state allowing him to translate between their needs and our capabilities. The Deep Waters Preservation Project now has 12 volunteers on a waiting list. People who want their final months to mean something, who choose to become part of an ancient system that keeps the mountains alive. And sometimes, late at night when the moon is dark and the mountains are quiet, I walk the deep passages Ben. Eath Grandfather Mountain with beings that most people think are legends. We check the underground streams, monitor the cave ecosystems, and maintain a balance that has existed for 1,000 years. The moon-eyed people still watch from the shadows. They still guard their territory and protect the deep waters. But now they do it in partnership with the surface world, taking what they need from those who freely give rather than hunting those who stumble into their domain. My grandmother was right about flowing waters. I do spend my life watching over them. I just never expected to be watching from underneath.